Positive approaches to providing support. Welcome to Module 2, Positive Behaviour Support. I'm Amelia Coleshaw and I will be going through this module with you today. This is session 2 of 4 blended learning modules. It's a recording of a presentation with a workbook for you to complete. The workbook will not be marked, it's to aid your learning and for your own notes. During the presentation you'll be asked to pause the recording and fill out sections of the workbook. You can do this electronically or print it out. Once you've completed the module, you can discuss the workbook with your manager in your next supervision. The modules are Understanding Behaviour, which you will have already completed, Positive Behaviour Support, which we're doing today, Health and Safety, and Policy and Recording. Following that, you may join a live interactive session on Microsoft Teams with a group of other people, and depending on the setting you work in, you may also attend a short face-to-face session to learn and practice physical techniques. To get the most out of the session, break it up. Online learning can be tiring. Take breaks when you need to. You can pause the session anytime. Don't be a passive participant. There's activities to complete throughout the course which will promote a deeper level of learning and will make it more engaging for you. Take notes if it's helpful. This will also help you stay engaged and aid your learning. Repeat. If there's something you don't understand, you can watch it again and ask. If there's anything you're unsure about, please check with your manager or a colleague, or you can email me on the internal email system. The aims of the session today are to be able to describe the key elements of positive behaviour support and to have a look at some example positive behaviour support plan. You may work in a service where you're supporting people that have positive behaviour support plans. You might be familiar with them, you may have looked at them, discussed them with colleagues. That's great. You may also work in a setting where there's less need for people to have PBS plans, and if that's the case, that's fine, don't worry about it, but it's just still important for you to know and understand what they look like and the purpose behind them. We'll be looking at the differences between proactive, active and reactive strategies, which we did look at in the Understanding Behaviour module. And we'll finish off by looking at the stages of emotional arousal and what you can do to help if you're supporting someone when something happens and they go through what we call the behaviour cycle. You may remember from last time the programme that we use for the content of this training is PROACT SCIPr, positive range of options to avoid crisis and use therapy, and the SCIPr is strategies for crisis intervention and prevention. This training programme is certified with the Restraint Reduction Network Training Standards 2019, so that means that we know it's good quality, it's ethical, and everything we teach you is agreed and approved ways of working. And the current Department of Health guidance that informs all of that is Positive and Proactive Care from 2014. And just to recap, this is the model we use in positive behaviour support. So the proactive green section, 70% of the time, all the good stuff you're doing to help ensure people are having a good experience of the day and a good quality of life. Active strategies, 20%, what we might have to do if someone's exposed to a trigger or we can see that they're struggling or maybe giving us warning signs that their behaviour is escalating. That's all the stuff we do that can bring it back down again, so how we might distract people or get them engaged in another activity or take them to a different area. And often we're very successful with that and it works. Sometimes there's little we can do and we can't stop something from escalating, and that's when we might have to use a reactive strategy, which is very much about keeping everybody safe, and it may also be where you may need to use a restrictive intervention. In Module 1, we spent quite a lot of time understanding behaviour and looking at some of the reasons people may use behaviours, the rationale behind that, and how in many cases it's quite reasonable in the moment for the person to feel like doing that. So we really do have to try and understand what's behind the behaviour if we're going to try and replace it with a more desirable behaviour. So you might remember there was the motivation assessment scale, which we looked at, and also generally knowing and understanding what triggers are for people, what you need to avoid. And the more you know and understand about that person, the better you can provide support that will avoid some of those things happening. So this is where positive behaviour support can help. As with all of our work, positive behaviour support is person-centred, very individualised. If you look at 2 positive behaviour support plans, they will probably be completely different, and that will reflect the individuality of the people and how different they are. So very person-centred, inclusive and co-produced. So when we're developing positive behaviour support plans, ideally we'll be doing it with everyone who's involved in that person's care and support, so that they can be supported consistently in different environments and different settings. And they are for the benefit of the individual. So they're useful for staff because they give us an outline of what to expect, what things look like when they're starting to go wrong, what we need to do and how to avoid it in the first place. So a really helpful tool for staff, but ultimately it's to benefit the individual. And again, that's around trying to make sure they're having a positive experience every day and their well-being and quality of life are good. Not punitive, so we don't use any consequences, punishments. If you don't do this, you can't have that. We know that doesn't help and doesn't work, and it's also not really very ethical either. So again, it's a positive and proactive approach. And they also need to be transparent and honest. If you're working with someone that has behaviours that can possibly cause harm to themselves or others, it's really important to be honest about that and open about it and objective and descriptive about those behaviours so people know what to expect. And yes, with a positive. So a good positive behaviour support plan will be objective and realistic. It should give you a really clear overview of the person. If it's accurate and it's used well and it's used consistently, it should reduce the likelihood of the behaviour occurring. Again, it should help supporters and carers operate consistently with the person, regardless of which setting or environment they're in. As we've said, it really needs to be based on a good understanding of the function behind the behaviour. And it should include skills teaching to help the person learn alternative ways of communicating. So when we understand the function of the behaviour, we can then start to think about maybe upskilling people, trying to help them learn other ways of dealing with some of the things that are causing them problems, so that they may be able to deal with it without having to resort to a behaviour. And this is where your recording comes in and is helpful. So you will be keeping records of behaviours, their frequency, triggers for people, that kind of thing. That's really important with PBS because we need that to help work out what's going on and why. And once we've done that, we can then design and implement strategies to reduce the behaviours. And again, that's very much around what we can do in the proactive sense. And once we have a PBS plan, it's important, like everything else, to monitor it and review it and revise it if necessary, if something isn't working or seems to need updating. You know, they're an ongoing thing and can be updated at any time. I'd like you to pause the presentation here and use the link at the back of your workbook to watch a short film clip from the Challenging Behaviour Foundation about PBS. It's Professor David Allen, who you would have seen on Module 1. It's only a couple of minutes, but it's a good overview and explanation. You'll remember in Module 1 we talked about the fact that often challenging behaviours are learned, and because of that we know they are open to being changed. And if we're able to teach people new skills and alternative behaviours to increase the number of ways they can achieve things, they may be less likely to use the challenging behaviour. and those new skills have to become more effective than the challenging behaviour. So it's important that if we're helping people learn new skills and they're using them, that we respond to that and we reinforce that if we want them to replace challenging behaviour. You'll also remember from Module 1 we looked at functional analysis, and that was with the motivation assessment scale activity and the 5 categories that we look at in terms of motivators behind behaviours: sensory stimulation, demand avoidance, social attention, tangible, access to stuff, and escape, social avoidance. So the better we understand what's behind the behaviour, that's where we can start to think about what kind of skills would be useful to try and help somebody learn. It may be that sensory stimulation is the motivator behind the behaviour, and we will probably all say there is nothing wrong with doing something that feels good. It may be helpful to get input from a learning disability occupational therapist, and you can do that by making a referral to the community learning disability team, and they may be able to get involved and do some assessment and maybe prescribe a sensory diet for someone, or make suggestions and recommendations about how to incorporate more alternative sensory input in their day-to-day lives. And also for us to explore different sensory objects, see what people prefer, and then try and find ways to use these to help people stay engaged and maybe do activities. And trying to make sure people can access what they need in terms of sensory stimulation regularly during the day, maybe for 5 minutes an hour or 10 minutes, a couple of times in the morning, a couple of times in the afternoon, whatever works for the person, but trying to make sure they can access what they need to in order to be able to carry on with other activities. The motivator may be avoiding demands or avoiding social situations and the demands of needing to interact with people. And we may all say there's nothing wrong with wanting to escape a difficult situation or a demand that someone else is making of us that we really don't want to do. So sometimes it's around trying to help the person learn other ways to stop something they don't like, and depending on someone's communication and the tools they use, it could be a particular word or a sign or a flashcard or a photo. It will vary from person to person, but much easier if someone can show us something that says, I don't want to be doing this anymore and I need to go, than having to use a behaviour. When they do that, it's really important to respond positively and praise them for using it and let them know they've done well, and to reinforce it. And sometimes if it's avoiding things, we need to think a bit more about how we introduce someone to a situation or activity, and maybe what we're doing and how we're approaching it, and is there anything we could do differently that might be helpful. And sometimes it might just be changing the way we ask people to do something. That can help. So we need to reflect on our approach and what we're doing and be prepared to adapt that and try and find other ways. The motivator may be social attention. We may all say there's nothing wrong with wanting attention. And if you think back to Module 1, we did talk about the fact that people you're supporting that use services, most of their daily or weekly interactions are with people who are paid to be interacting with them rather than natural mutual friends. And we did stop and think a bit about how that's different to us and people we spend time with. So quite often people do crave or need or desire social attention, maybe more than they are able to get you know, in a service setting for various reasons. So there's nothing wrong with that. But maybe it's helpful to try and get someone to try different ways of getting attention that's more appropriate than using a challenging behaviour. And again, using people's communication tools can help with that. And every time someone does that, we should respond positively and praise them, let them know they've done well. And again, just trying to make sure the person has regular positive interactions and good quality relationships with other people. The motivator may be tangible or access to stuff, and we might all say there's nothing wrong with wanting certain items, and in our lives probably we can help ourselves to whatever we fancy whenever we want it, largely. So sometimes, again, it's teaching the person other ways of asking for something and using communication tools, cards, gestures, signs, other than a behaviour. Again, responding positively to this every time it's used. And where possible, trying to teach people how to get something for themselves. It's very difficult, perhaps, when you're reliant on staff if you want something to eat or drink. And it comes back also to the thing about not having that much control over your life and not being able to do these things independently. So trying to increase the amount of ways people can be independent as well. A PBS plan has different elements and they run in a particular order, and if you go through it from start to finish, it should give you a good introduction to the person and a good overview. So it starts by describing the behaviour that people may use and a bit about how that might impact on the person themselves, other people, and that can include staff. It then outlines what we believe or understand to be the person's triggers for the behaviour, and we then look at proactive strategies, so the green section, 70%, what we do most of the time to try and ensure people are doing okay. We know when something goes wrong, people generally are quite good at giving us warning signs, and when you know someone well, you know what to look out for, and you can tell if they're becoming agitated or distressed. So that's where we might need to use our active strategies to divert, distract, change things, go to another activity, swap to a different staff member, whatever it is that works, and hopefully most of the time that's successful. If it's not, the reactive strategies in a PBS plan will tell us what we need to do and how we need to do it, with an emphasis on safety for everybody. And then post-crisis interventions. So if someone does go through the whole behaviour cycle, what's helpful for them afterwards and what can we do to support them after the event? In your workbook, you've got an example PBS plan for Samrat from page 2 to page 6. It is a real example, but the name's been changed. I'd like you to pause the recording here and read through the information. It's quite comprehensive, but look at the kind of information that's written there and also try to notice how it's written and how it's presented. And if you haven't met Samrat before and you're looking at this, do you think it's a positive or negative introduction to him? And how would you feel about meeting him and working with him? So hopefully, having looked at Samrat's PBS plan, you've read a good description of the behaviour. You know exactly what that looks like, what to look out for, and if he does go through the behaviour cycle, you know exactly what to expect. You also know how that can impact on him and his lifestyle and other people. You know what triggers his behaviours, and again, if you read those and think about them in the context of him and his life, a lot of them are quite reasonable. You've got a good idea there of all the things that help generally on a day-to-day basis, things that he likes, things that he enjoys, things that can help keep him on the level. You've got a good idea of what to look out for if he has a trigger or if he starts to use behaviours, and you've then got a good idea of what you need to be doing as the active strategies. Also very clear about what you need to be doing as reactive strategies if it escalates to that level, and what can be helpful afterwards. So hopefully, having read through Samrat's plan, it gives you a flavour of a young man and his lifestyle and the environments he spends his time in and the things that work well for him and the things to avoid, and presents him in a positive light, and you think, yeah, I can work with this person and sounds interesting, and yeah, it should give you a good flavour of him, but in a positive sense. Okay, there's an activity for you to do now with PBS plans. So you can pause the recording, and on page 11 of your workbook, you've got entries for a PBS plan, 25 in total. So what I'd like you to do is go through those 25 entries and think about the language that's used and how they're written, because some of them aren't actually suitable or appropriate, and for those ones just put a cross beside them. And then for the ones that remain, have a think about which sections of the PBS plan they should go in, and then you can either write them in or type them in the template you've got in your book from page 7 to page 10. Okay, from the 25, on the left hand side here are some of the statements that we would say are unsuitable, and where possible there's an alternative. She gets really tetchy. I wouldn't like to read that written about me or my daughter or my sister. It doesn't really say very much, and it has a kind of derogatory tone to it. She appears to be agitated is much more objective and descriptive. Number 4, trashing her room. Again, that sounds a bit negative, and it's not really descriptive. I don't know what that means. What does that look like? Number 20, emptying the contents of her drawers and wardrobe, tipping the furniture over. Now I have a good idea of what that looks like. Number 6, starts being horrible to others and swearing. That's quite subjective, really, and being horrible to others, you know, we need to understand when people are using behaviours, often they don't want to be feeling like they are, and they don't want to be using the behaviour. People are often quite upset about it afterwards and remorseful. So they're not choosing to be horrible to other people, it's just that what they're doing could be offensive to others, but that's not the intention behind it, so we wouldn't use something like that. But again, we might use something like number 15, which is much more descriptive, raises her voice and says fuck off or bastards to anyone nearby. And the same for the next one, nasty to others with verbal abuse. I wouldn't like to read that written about me. You probably wouldn't either. But again, a much more objective and descriptive statement. Number 12, self-harm. That doesn't really tell me anything. Does that mean she hits her head against the wall? Does it mean that she smacks her ears? Does it mean that she picks skin off her arms? It doesn't really tell me anything. Whereas number 8, starts rubbing and picking the skin on her left forearm. That's a really clear description, and I would know exactly then what to look out for. 22, you skip to move her away. We've put this one in because when you get to look at any of the physical interventions, they all have a name, and we need to use their names when we're using them in people's plans and guidelines. So if it says you skip to move her away, I might not know which technique that is. But if it says as number 7, use a one-person touch support to guide her away from others, I know exactly what that technique is, what it looks like and how to do it. So we need to be clear about that. 24, physical aggression and violence. Again, that doesn't really tell me anything about what that looks like. Does that mean kicking someone, pulling their hair, pushing and shoving them? Well, actually, for Michaela, it's number 18. It means striking or slapping with an open hand, and it can be directed at peers and staff. So hopefully those ones on the left are ones you may have marked as not suitable, and can see why there's an alternative that yeah, feels a bit better. And what we'll do now is just go through the different sections, and you can see, think about where you put some of the statements. When we've done this in the classroom, it seems that some of these can easily fit in different sections, so don't get too hung up about whether you've got them in exactly the right place. It's more just to get you thinking about the sections of the plan and the order it runs in and how we organise the information in it. So description of the behaviour, striking or slapping with an open hand can be directed at peers or staff. emptying the contents of her drawers and wardrobe, tipping the furniture over. So for Michaela, these are the kind of things she does as her worst case scenario, or her what we might call a crisis. Impact on her and others: she could hurt or injure herself, especially with the emptying her drawers and wardrobe. And triggers we know for Michaela: unexpected loud sounds, for example, a barking dog or somebody shouting nearby. Not being able to go out when she wants to the shop or for a walk. And possibly pain. Previous behaviours have been attributed to a tooth abscess and a urine infection. The proactive strategies we use with Michaela, the things that we do as much as we can every day. She does enjoy making her own lunch, usually a sandwich, so trying to make sure that she can do that when possible. That's something that she really enjoys. She's got a visual timetable and a planner, and it's really important to use these with her every day in the morning, because it really helps her understand what's happening today and in what order and who's doing what and when. So do make sure that you use that with her every morning. Using social stories for new and different situations. She has got some in her social story book in her room, and yeah, any time that she needs to be introduced to something new or different, we found that they can be really helpful, so trying to use those where possible. And just generally giving her positive feedback. She really likes being complimented and thanked for helping with tasks. There's various things that she enjoys doing and she's good at, and she responds really well when we give her praise and positive feedback. And every day she's best when she's got something meaningful to do. There's lots and lots of things, but it includes things like putting the shopping away, folding towels in the laundry, making drinks for other people, any of these things. Yeah, just again trying to make sure that she can do those as much as possible during the day. She really values being able to be helpful and making a contribution. We can tell when Michaela starts feeling agitated or distressed, because this is where she'll start rubbing and picking the skin on her left forearm, and you'll notice there are marks on there because this is something she's done for a long time. And also she might start speaking in a louder voice, and if there's anyone around she might start saying fuck off or bastards to them, and that's when we know that we might need to use an active strategy. So our active strategies, sometimes it will be helpful to use a one-person touch support to guide her away from other people to a quiet area outside or to her room, depending on whereabouts in the building she is. And often that is successful, and once she's away from other people and maybe in a slightly different environment or room, she may calm. And also, if we're wanting to distract her, this is another effective way to do it, is offering her activities, and some of the things that she usually responds to, going outside to take photos. So even if it's just a leaf or a flower or the sky, but quite often you can engage her with that and she'll be keen to do that. If she doesn't want to do that, sometimes looking at her photo book with her and talking about some of the photography she's done can be really helpful and can distract her and stop her behaviour from escalating. Reactive strategies: if she's striking or slapping people, or if she's in her room and tipping over the furniture and emptying it, really we just need to try and keep people safe. So we need to stay calm, and if she's striking or slapping people, it's not helpful to try and intervene at this stage, but it's more important that we just try to move other people away from her. And also keep away from her personal space, but we need to stay around and observe her. And when she's in this state, avoid making eye contact as well, because that can seem to escalate the situation. Post-crisis interventions: she may be tearful and upset. Let her know you're around if she needs anything. And often with Michaela, at this stage, she will be upset because she'll be worried that she's either hurt someone or done a bad thing or done something wrong or upset somebody, and she'll often be very apologetic and remorseful. So it's good to reassure her. So that's just a very brief example of a positive behaviour support plan. There's not as much information in it as there is in Samrat's, but hopefully it's been a useful exercise just to think about what goes in each section. I'd like you to pause the recording here and use the other link in the back of your workbook. There's an animation from the British Institute of Learning Disabilities about positive behaviour support. It's about 7 minutes, but it's a really good overview and again a very good summary, I guess, of what we've looked at so far in this session. This is the time intensity model or behaviour cycle, also referred to as the stages of emotional arousal. So along the bottom, the green line is the baseline, and for all of us that's where we're calm and happy and content. But we know that we can become emotionally aroused various different ways, including getting really pissed off, angry, frustrated, and we know that when that happens it affects our behaviour. And that's what you see in the curve that goes up and is different colours. And what we usually do is, well, we'll talk through it. So I'll talk through this behaviour cycle using an example of a young man I used to support. I'll call him Stephen, and Stephen has autism and severe learning disabilities. He has quite high levels of challenging behaviour, so had 2-to-1 staff at all times, and in the day service where he'd come every day, he had his own environment and his own transport. So for example, he may arrive at the day centre in a calm state, and I'll give an example of what happened one day. It was lunchtime and we were sitting there eating our lunch, and I was sitting at the table with him and my colleague was sitting on an armchair on the other side of the room, and a dishwasher in the room next door finished its cycle and did 5 quite high-pitched beeps. Now when the first beep went, I noticed the change of his facial expression and something in his eyes that let me know that was difficult for him. And we know he has sensory sensitivities, and maybe he would have heard that much, much louder than it actually was for other people. So that's the little yellow bit going up with a trigger of a intolerable sound that you can't do anything about. Now sometimes someone might cope with that, and the dishwasher could have done all 5 beeps, and after that it would have come back down to a calm state. However, that's not what happened on this occasion. So by the 3rd beep, he was showing signs he was gone into the build-up escalation stage. His lunch had gone on the floor. He'd completely just thrown his lunch on the floor. He was pacing around. He was hitting his ear quite hard, and he'd tipped his chair over. So we knew that this was going to escalate, and we were quite limited in what we could do. By the 5th beep of the dishwasher, the table was on its side. He was hitting the wall with his fist, and he was hitting his ear again, but much harder with a fist. And he did have quite a lot of damage to his ears from where he'd been hitting them over years and years and years, when he had to tolerate sounds that were far too loud for him. So the crisis was really that thing on the 5th beep, the table on its side, hitting the wall, hitting his ear. That was his kind of worst case scenario. And it doesn't go on for very long. The crisis is quite explosive. So when someone's in their crisis state, what they're doing is quite intense, but it's unlikely to go on for hours and hours and hours. Often it may just be a few minutes or 30 seconds. Following that, coming back down in the recovery phase, that afternoon he didn't really want to do the activity he usually would have done, which was taking the recycling to the recycling bins in the public car park. He didn't want to go out, he didn't want to do anything, and we kind of left him to his own devices and just reassured him and made sure he was okay. And he came back down to a calm state, and then the slump, in the minibus on the way home that evening, he seemed really weary, and he actually dozed off and fell asleep, which was unheard of and very unusual for him. But that kind of slump, and you'll know if this is the same for all of us, and if you're supporting someone when they're going through this, you'll also go through it. Some of what's going on is the chemical reaction and a shot of adrenaline and the fight or flight, and that intensity of a crisis. Quite often afterwards, it's quite exhausting, and you might feel drained and tired and weary, and that's kind of reflected in the slump. So the 5 stages we look at in emotional arousal is the trigger, the build-up, the crisis, the recovery, and the slump. So you can pause the recording here and complete the activity on page 14. So it asks you to think about someone you support who uses challenging behaviours, and you've got a table to fill in for each of those stages. What do you notice about them, their behaviour changing? What clues do they give you? How do you know if they're in the build-up? How do you know if they're in the crisis? And then the other part of it is to write down what you think you can do to help at each stage. So if you're the staff member alongside them when this is going on, what are the do's and don'ts, and what's our role in terms of managing the situation and supporting them? So in the trigger stage, what's helpful to do is observe the person. As we said with Stephen, he went on and went through the build-up right up to crisis, but someone else may react to a trigger but then quite quickly calm down again. So it is about observing the person and watching for changes in their behaviour. It might be worth letting other people know that this has happened, and we need to keep an eye on someone, or just be a bit more aware. And of course, as much as possible, help the person avoid the trigger in future. So we were very careful after that with Stephen about where he had his lunch and anything nearby that might make a loud high-pitched noise. If someone doesn't calm and they continue building up and the behaviour is escalating, it's really good to know what people's early warning signs are. So if you know someone well, you'll know this, but if not, you can learn from your colleagues, and it should be in their PBS plan. Remain calm, which is easier said than done sometimes, because you will maybe starting to feel a bit anxious. You might be thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next? Is someone going to get hurt? And you'll have that shot of adrenaline. So it's quite important to recognise that, and even if you're not feeling calm inside, try to present as calm, because the person needs to know that you're going to be able to help them through this. Avoid confrontation. So if it was a demand avoidance and we've been trying to get someone to do something and they really don't want to do it and they're escalating in their behaviour, leave it. There's no point putting pressure on someone to where they're quite clearly showing us they don't want to do it, and if we carry on down that road, we may well end up with them being pushed into hurting someone or hurting themselves and everything that goes along with that. So just leave it if it's not working. And this is also about our self-awareness. So while we're feeling anxious and what might happen and what will I need to do, take stock of that and remind yourself that after the event you'll have an opportunity, hopefully for a debrief, to talk through it with the supervisor, to talk through it with other staff, and get the support you need to help you kind of process what's happened and debrief from it. And respond to the person. When we understand behaviours and the context that people are living their lives in, quite often it is reasonable, and it's useful to respond to that. And we can respond by asking what's wrong. We may have seen the trigger, it may be obvious, but sometimes things happen and we think, well, what on earth's all that about? Everything was fine 5 minutes ago. So sometimes just asking someone what's wrong, suggesting alternatives, again trying to distract them to another activity, giving them space. can be helpful. And if they just want to be on their own, or go out in the garden or have a walk around, be somewhere quiet, that's fine. Distractions and empathising. So if we know why the behaviour's happened and it's reasonable, that's fine. We said last time, it's fine to feel pissed off or angry. We were all able to think of examples of when something's happened that made us feel angry, you know, and it's okay to let people know it's all right to have that feeling. It's not okay to hit someone or damage property, but it is okay to be pissed off. And that can be quite reassuring. We can also be thinking about what might happen next if the behaviour is still escalating. So it might be that you need to ask colleagues to help try and contain the situation. You might be thinking about moving other people away. Anything that might be a danger, if it's someone that maybe throws objects or might use an object as a weapon. Obviously trying to help someone stay calm. And be sensitive to the person's self-esteem. So this is around how we speak to people and the language we use and how we approach it with them, because someone's going to be feeling pretty crappy if they're, you know, in this state, and it's really important that we're mindful of that. Some of the things not to do in that phase, don't plant suggestions. So, oh, you're not going to throw that cup at me, are you? Well, no, I wasn't, but actually now you've said it, maybe I will. Don't threaten consequences. We don't use a punitive approach. It doesn't work. It's not helpful, and it's not a very ethical way to work. Don't give choices where there are none. So, well, do you want to stop hitting me now? No, actually I don't. I'd like to carry on. And don't have several different people giving directions. It's really important when we're working in these situations that it's great that staff need to be around and looking out for each other, and but it's really important that there's maybe a lead person and other people kind of stand back, and sometimes it's not helpful if everyone gets involved and starts you know, giving directions and instructions. That can just escalate things. And don't restart whatever triggered it off, especially if it's a confrontation about avoiding a demand or something. Yeah, it's really not helpful. And don't rehash it. So obviously you will need to hand over information to staff on the next shift, and you may be in a position where you need to pass the information on to people at home, families or carers, but just being quite sensitive about how you do that, and ideally out of earshot of the person. If we're unsuccessful in our active strategies during the build-up stage and someone goes into crisis, the emphasis here is really on safety and damage limitation. So it's generally not advisable to go near the person because the state of mind they're in, it's not a good time to, if we try talking to them or reasoning with them, they won't be able to hear what we're saying or process it. It can often just exacerbate things. It's not a good time generally to try and move someone away. It might be more useful to try and move other people away from them if they're at risk. And really all we can do is make sure the person in crisis is safe. So with Stephen that day with the dishwasher, when he was hitting the wall and the table went over, myself and my colleague just stood out of his way and let him do what he needed to do. There was no point trying to stop him hitting the wall or tipping the table over, and if we'd gone in and tried to stop him doing those things, it would have got worse, and one or both of us definitely would have got hurt as well. So we just observed him and made sure that he was able to do what he needed to do, and then when it was over, we you know, tidied up and got on with the rest of the day really. In the recovery stage, again, don't put too much pressure on people. As I said with Stephen that day, he didn't want to do his recycling, which was unusual because that was one of the few things he would actually engage with and do with some enthusiasm. But people might not want to do very much. Might need a lot of reassurance, checking in that they're okay. If there are other things, you know, help them calm down. Or doing a quiet activity with them, that might be useful. And then the slump at the end, that bit where we dip underneath the baseline, again, it's just being around, letting people know you're there, making sure they're okay, not putting any demands or expectations on them, just keeping an eye on them really. And they may feel quite weary and tired, and you might too. And yeah, it's not helpful to try and tell them off or try and get them to apologise. People, as we've said, generally don't enjoy using these behaviours and often feel pretty bad about it afterwards, as it is. But yeah, don't try to get an apology or tell them off. That's not helpful generally. Okay, you've now completed this module. You can discuss your learning and any questions you have with your line manager in your next supervision, or you can email me. Your colleagues will also be able to help you understand the behaviour of people you're supporting and the best ways to provide quality support. And your next module is module 3, health and safety.